Hello and welcome back. In this Black Excellist presentation, we want to celebrate Zora Neale Hurston, novelist, folklorist, and playwright.
Welcome to blackexcellist.com, the site where we share Black excellence, opulence, and affluence. Our mission is to inspire you as we enlighten you.
A major author of 20th-century African-American literature, Zora Neale Hurston is often celebrated as the queen of the Harlem Renaissance, whose work captured the voices of Southern African Americans. The literary genius made her mark in New York City during the golden era of Black arts and culture. Her masterpiece, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was not well received at the time, but however has become a classic, a perennial bestseller, and one of the finest American novels ever written. In this original Black Excellist video, we will be featuring Zora Neale Hurston, an anthropologist and luminary of the Harlem Renaissance. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 1. Zora Neale Hurston enjoyed a happy childhood in an all-Black Florida town. Zora Hurston was born in Notasulga, Alabama on January 7, 1891. Zora Hurston was born the fifth of 8 children of Lucy Ann Hurston, a schoolteacher, and John Hurston, a sharecropper, carpenter, and Baptist preacher. When Zora Hurston was 3, her family moved to Eatonville, Florida. The rural community near Orlando was the nation's first incorporated Black township. In Eatonville, Zora was never indoctrinated in inferiority, and she could see the evidence of Black achievement all around her. Growing up in this culturally affirming setting in an 8-room house on 5 acres of land, Zora had a relatively happy childhood. Despite the usual clashes with her preacher father, who would eventually become mayor of their town, Zora was proud to call Eatonville home, a place where Black Americans could live as they desired, independent of white society. However, Hurston's idyllic childhood came to an abrupt end when her mother died in 1904. After her mother's death, Zora's father remarried quickly to a young woman whom the quick-tempered Zora would engage in a fistfight. 2 weeks later, 13-year-old Zora was forced to pack her bags, leave the only home she had ever known, and began a life of wandering from one family member to another. Number 2. Hurston enrolled into Howard University in Washington, D.C. in 1918. At the age of 26, Zora still had not finished high school, but was eager to return. Needing to present herself as a teenager to qualify for free public schooling, she posed as a 16-year-old and started claiming to be born in 1901 from that moment forward. Zora graduated from high school in 1918, and in that same year, she began her college studies at Howard University, the historically Black college located in Washington, D.C. Hurston was among the earliest initiates of Zeta Phi Beta sorority, founded for and by Black women. She took courses in English, Spanish, Greek, as well as public speaking, and eventually earned her associate degree in 1920. Zora left Howard in 1924, and in the following year, Hurston was offered a scholarship to attend Barnard College of Columbia University, a women's college in New York City. She was the only Black student at that time, and while there, at the age of 37, Hurston received her BA in Anthropology in 1928. Number 3. Hurston was among the central figures of the Harlem Renaissance period. While living in Harlem, New York, Zora befriended poets Countee Cullen and Langston Hughes, among other writers and luminaries of the period. Some said her apartment was a regular spot, an open house for social gatherings in the 1920s, which was the peak of the Harlem Renaissance. Hurston's short satires were inspired by racial discrimination and African American experience. In 1926, a group of young Black writers, including Zora Hurston, Hughes, and Wallace Thurman, calling themselves the Niggerati, produced a literary magazine called Fire that featured many of the young artists and writers of the Harlem Renaissance. Although she had taken up roots in the lights of New York City, Hurston was proud to have the map of Dixie on her tongue, and her literary work presents and preserves the folk voice as she knew it from her youth in the South. She bucked the conventions of the Black literary establishment and had her characters speak in Black dialect. Further, Hurston had a sense that the folk material that she loved was not a lower form of art, that some of her contemporaries argued, but an oral tradition that had enabled Southern Blacks to survive with dignity and strength. Her goal was to glorify and preserve a form of Black expression that she felt was being diluted by urbanization. Number 4. Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God was published in 1937. Zora Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, published in 1937, is highly regarded as a classic of the Harlem Renaissance and considered Hurston's best-known work. The novel explores the life of the main character, Janie Crawford, an African-American woman in her 40s who recounts her life through the details of her 3 major romantic relationships. The literary brilliance not only explored the theme of racism, but it also addressed gender masculinity and feminism. Other themes that were addressed were the liberated woman, the devaluing or valuing of women in relationships, as well as domestic violence. Set in Florida in the early 20th century, the novel was first poorly received, but 40 years after its debut, it skyrocketed in popularity and is now unarguably one of the most influential literary contributions to women's and American literature. Number 5. Hurston's literary works cut across poetry, essays, fiction, and nonfiction. Zora's literary works cemented her place as a central figure of the Harlem Renaissance. Hurston established herself as a literary force with her spot-on accounts of the African-American experience. She published several stories, articles, and anthologies, like The New Negro and Fire. By the late 1930s and early 40s, she started to reach the real zenith of her career by first writing and publishing a well-received collection of Black Southern folklore titled Mules and Men. Hurston then followed up with her first 3 novels, Jonah's Gourd Vine, the earlier mentioned Their Eyes Were Watching God, and Moses, Man of the Mountain. Hurston also wrote a collection of 10 plays between 1925 and 1944 that remained unpublished until a manuscript curator discovered them in the U.S. Copyright Office. When her autobiography, Dutch Tracks on a Road, was published in 1942, Hurston finally received the well-earned acclaim that had long eluded her throughout her career. However, Hurston never received the financial reward she deserved. Number 6. Hurston became intrigued with voodoo while studying in the Caribbean. Hurston traveled extensively in the Caribbean and the American South and immersed herself in local cultural practices to conduct her anthropological research. During her travels and research, Zora became intrigued by the practice of voodoo, and she began to incorporate supernatural elements into her novels and stories. Although her work received increasing acclaim from the white literati of New York, Zora often felt under attack by members of the Black arts movement. However, her mission was to present a more fair and respectful study of the voodoo traditions that she felt was subject to racism and judgment, or just simply reduced to caricatures of Black magic and devil worship. Number 7. Hurston was first married in 1927 and then again in 1939 and 1944. Hurston's personal life was always complicated, and she revealed as little about it as possible in her work. Hurston had her first marriage in 1927 to Herbert Sheen, a former teacher, jazz musician, and physician. However, their marriage would end in 1931. In 1939, Zora married Albert Price, but their marriage was brief. In 1944, she married James Howell Pitts, but their marriage did not last a year. Number 8. Hurston's final decade was met with financial and personal struggles. Zora Hurston was virtually a forgotten literary figure when she reached her 60s. She was living in Fort Pierce, Florida, struggling with health problems and money concerns. Hurston, having no children and no relatives nearby, entered a county-run nursing home. In 1958, Hurston suffered a series of strokes and entered the St. Lucie County Welfare Home, where she transitioned on January 28, 1960. After Hurston's passing, all of her possessions, including her manuscripts, letters, and photos, were ordered to be burned by the staff of the nursing home. A law officer and friend was passing by her home and noticed the burning barrel. The officer stopped and put out the fire, thus saving an invaluable collection of literary documents for posterity. Hurston's remains were in an unmarked and unidentified grave until 1973. In that year, popular novelist Alice Walker and fellow Hurston scholar Charlotte Hunt discovered an unmarked grave in the general area where she had been buried. They went on to mark it as hers. Alice Walker commissioned an inscription with the words Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South, novelist, folklorist, anthropologist. Number 9. Hurston achieved great fame in her lifetime, but she also suffered disgrace. For all her accomplishments, Hurston struggled financially and personally during her final decade. Several factors led to Zora's decline from her standing as a vibrant presence in the Harlem Renaissance to become a poor woman working as a maid in Florida. The need to make ends meet overcame her ability to produce authentic art in the end. At the mercy of publishers and her sponsors, it was always a struggle to focus on her craft, keep researching, and keep writing, and at times she was accused of pandering to whites. The Eatonville voice that Hurston so loved faltered as she looked for a mass appeal and a mainstream audience. An outsider in the white world of publishing, she was criticized by Black leaders and intellectuals as well for writing dialogue in rural African American dialect and for presenting her characters in ways that critics considered backward or inappropriate. Though she would have been loath to admit it, Hurston also suffered because she was Black and a woman, two factors that stood in the way of her being able to publish her work. Then there was the arrest and charges amidst false pedophilia accusations. Although the case was fabricated and later dropped after Hurston proved she was in Honduras at the time of the alleged attack, the scandal was devastating and nearly drove Zora to suicide. With a broken spirit and a destroyed reputation, she kept writing as she lived out the final years of her life in Florida, in poverty and in obscurity. Number 10. Hurston was one of the most prominent writers of the 19th and 20th century. Ridiculed in her life, yet revered after death, Zora Neale Hurston has left an indelible legacy on the literary community and commanded an influential place in Black history. Forgoing conventions of what it meant to be a woman and a Black writer, Hurston was free-spirited, both professionally and personally. These qualities, which materialized in ambivalent politics and a commitment to using Southern Black vernacular when Black intellectuals felt that it contradicted the image of the new Negro. In the past few decades, however, thanks to the tenacious support of feminist writers like Alice Walker, Hurston's work re-entered the Black canon and made her primary work, Their Eyes Were Watching God, required reading in classrooms across the country. Zora Neale Hurston's legacy endures, and an entirely new generation of readers who now honor and appreciate her as both a writer and a wonderful being.
We appreciate the fact that you stayed with us until the end. Thank you for spending time with us, and don't forget to like this video. Also, make sure you subscribe so that you never miss a video. Bye for now. We will see you tomorrow.